Welcome to the March 6th bhyve production user call. We have Andrew, Richard, Eva, Patrick, Hans, Jan, and myself, Michael, so far. And a very quick, brief point. Congratulations, Flow Movie, for winning an Oscar for Best Animated Feature-Length Film. That is a huge win for open source. It was made with Blender, and it's a huge win for the Latvian film industry. I did spend some time this morning looking for various articles of the best I could do is why big studios are not using Blender. And I suppose, given that this came out of a small studio, that's a perfectly valid collision of things. Now, a few calls to action. I will go with the quick ones first. So, Alexander Moten, to whom any ZFS user owes a beverage at minimum to for his amazing work on ZFS. He pointed out that OpenZFS has quite the backlog of pull requests, many of which are remarkably cool features. And Rob made a very good case for the value of contributing with simple things like testing and spell checking and validating if documentation is clear. And so you can too. Feel free to hop in there and take a look at some of these requests and just latch on to whatever makes sense to you. You do not need to be a C developer with a CS degree. Spelling can be done by anybody. So take a peek. That feedback encourages developers, which helps get things across finish lines. Because if, say, a developer is working on several things and one gets some love from people like you, it will probably get some more love from the developer there. So there's a link. It's pretty easy to find the OpenZFS repo on GitHub. Maybe at some point we can have a discussion about the value of different repos, such as Codeberg, such as others. And I do not know if they have, say, build infrastructure, but let's get to that totally separately. Anyway, ZFS needs your help. BSD can always use more sponsors. If you have an employer who has, say, a little budget in hand, a little bit goes a long way, even if it's for travel grants or food or otherwise. So take a peek at bsdcan.org. I'll make that into a hillbilly URL, can.org. And yes, that's my formatting trick to preserve the link. And another call to action that has heated up in the last 48 hours. So I've found that there is definitely interest in organizations funding ready projects. Shall we say shovel ready, as they say in construction projects that are budgeted, designed, they just need money. Well, it's a funny thing about open source projects. To sit down and make a proposal takes subject matter expertise, it takes time, and focus and prioritization, such that I think a very effective tool based on all of the amazing conversations you've all had on these calls, it would be very helpful to send some under 4-digit amounts of money to various developers to research what's involved in any given feature request that we've established on these calls. Now, the absolute key thing there is that sometimes that research ends up performing 80% of the work. It's like, oh, well, to answer the question also solved it. Sometimes that means the research results in a decision that this feature is completely unfeasible, a new approach is needed. That was fun, but don't go there. And that takes time and effort. So I have begun funding individuals out of pocket just to put my money where my mouth is. And I invite you to do the same, either directly to them or through BSD Fund, which is something that's more or less me and all of you advising, such as for those who caught yesterday's libZFS discussion on the ZFS call, after months, arguably years in discussion, Rob and Jan came up with just a super clear use case on libZFS. What does a external consumer expect? What would make consuming ZFS more useful for a utility that, say, does snapshotting, replication, or some amount of data management with it. And some light bulbs went off in Rob's head, and he took notes, and he has a very clear picture of what simple housekeeping and all the structuring of libraries would be beneficial. So I invite you to support him through his Ko-Fi page. It's linked in the ZFS doc. That's not hard to find. And he and I had been discussing about, okay, there's a notion that, well, over 50% of ZFS has changed since, I don't know, between 2008 and 18 approximately. Okay, well, what is that number today? Is it 51%? Is it 52%? Is it 92%? So he will hopefully investigate that. A hot topic, bringing it right home, thank you very much, is CUDA. We had, I think, 2 weeks back, it was right there on the 20th, we had a very good introduction to the key points when running CUDA here and now on FreeBSD. And what did you say earlier, Patrick? Too long, didn't read. Keep your different versions of things in sync, be it the drivers on FreeBSD and then the related drivers and bits and Linux compatibility, et cetera, which may need a Metaport. And Tomac from the call has been very helpful. Alexei has been super helpful. And Eva, are you still on? Eva has spent quite some time with CUDA and has some time available. So Eva, is there anything you want to add in there? Or is that a somewhat accurate description?
That is an accurate description. And just to get prepared for that, this afternoon, I dug out one of the data center NVIDIA GPUs that I have, which is, this is a T40 with 24 gigs. So that is going to go into one of these servers that's down here that if the camera could move, I could show you, but it's a server. It looks like a server. This is going to go in it. There's two 4,000. Yeah, there are multiple servers, it's true. So, yeah. The idea in this particular case with doing the CUDA development is to have multiple generations of different cards so that we can test CUDA compatibility with the different NVIDIA drivers that have the match, accordingly, the version match for specific types of generations, right? Because it's well and good to say we now have CUDA support for the most recent whatever on the most recent driver on the most recent kernel and so on and so on and so on. But the majority of people that I have talked to on the FreeBSD forums and Reddit and so forth do not have the most recent GPUs, nor do they have necessarily the data center specific ones. And if they're doing some like professional level work, then they may have a workstation that they want to use that does need some display ports. And so I also have a number of A4000s, which are 2 generations old now, right? And so those have HDMI ports on them, or display ports rather, and they're single slot, so they only use a single connector, so they're a little bit more, let's just say they're better for developer distribution, and the costs are much lower than the larger one that I just pulled out. So having all those different generations to test on is going to be, I think, pretty productive. And I also have some other Pascal versions in there strewn about amongst all of the parts. So that's going to get going today. And hopefully we can get some of the more popular open source related large language model applications running within, say, just the span of March, right? So I have OLLAMA running 48 different models over here. This is all in Linux. And then I have OpenWebUI that can talk to OLLAMA and OpenAPI and all these other things, or OpenAI rather. And some AMD GPUs, which is also of note for certain types of development, but we're not going to touch on that for the CUDA support. And some integrated NVIDIA GPUs as well that I think would be beneficial to include on the workflow for product support and testing, right? Because as part of the enterprise working group's new laptop initiative, a lot of laptops come with discrete NVIDIA graphics cards, and people want to be able to use those too. So I have some of those sitting around somewhere, some discrete, you know, boxes with. I have a lot of GPUs, got a lot of servers, so and I've got time right now to do this. So
And
let's do
time
it.
is usually the most finite commodity in all of this. That said, what would you consider your first deliverable? I hear a survey of compatibility, perhaps?
Yeah. So the first thing I'll do is probably take an take a itemized list of all of the different hardware that's available and the firmware versions that are running on those specific cards, and then the systems that can be used locally to test, um, and whether or not those have, whether or not those match the requirements for hardware compatibility list on FreeBSD 14.2. I don't see why any of them wouldn't, given that all the hardware I purchase is checked against the hardware compatibility list to begin with, because why would I want to not run FreeBSD? Um, so basically, I want to provide all of that ahead of time, right? Here's the matrix of things that we will be using to do the development on, and the quantities of them, whether or not they're going to have virtual machine access through bhyve, or if it's going to be bare metal specific. Um, I don't know that there was a focus that mentioned for doing SRIOV or any sort of partitioning of the data center grade GPUs for NVIDIA. That's maybe for, stage two, right? So don't want to overcomplicate things initially. So
Correct. Although there is the new IOMMU code for AMD that definitely needs exercising.
yes, and I have some AMD GPUs.
Awesome.
Thank you, Michael.
You're
So
welcome.
mhm.
So there's a taste of what Eva is up to, and the timing is good. Does anyone have questions, requests, or ideas for Eva? It sounds like
I
Jan, you have
have
questions about
several
API level
questions.
support. Yes,
So
please.
just for clarification, I assume your comment was about the IOMMU driver for AMD CPUs, not for AMD GPUs.
Correct, because that's been broadly broken, or there was more accurately a shim for bhyve rather than a proper IOMMU driver. And
Uh,
that's been
then,
hamstringing people.
so would this be about testing the any potential problems with running CUDA applications inside of bhyve guests, or is it about getting the Linux CUDA drivers smuggled into FreeBSD processors running with the native ABI on a FreeBSD kernel? Because
That's going to be both,
libc6, okay,
right? So the first stage is going to be doing it through Linuxolator on bare metal host, and then the second is going to be using um,
but
bhyve with pass through and regular FreeBSD.
1 or 2 weeks ago, I think we had the third crazy option of using libc6, which kind of interposes the uh, system call symbols for applications using the libc symbols to perform system calls, and thereby allowing a FreeBSD process running on a FreeBSD kernel with a FreeBSD API to dynamically link against the Linux driver shared library without running under the Linuxolator.
Yes,
Uh,
I do recall
and
hearing.
that's like a third crazy option.
Yes.
Yeah. And so I was just confused which of them or any or which subset you're supposed to tackle first.
And
Wonderful.
you're you're explaining my joke to me on the importance of some research budget, because a little bit of research goes a very long way. Sometimes that research is like package search version number, and to do that in a more scientific than random late night manner That is very, very important. Well, thank you, Eva. Everyone jump in with questions as appropriate. Uh, Hans, we've, over the course of these calls, discussed quite a few things at length. Let's see. I am curious if you've spent time with EDK2, because one of those absolute perennial issues in bhyve has been the state of the EDK2 uh, bhyve firmware. And Alexei noticed that it's not been updated since 2023. There are new features. On a recent call, we pointed out that, well, OpenSSL always needs some love and updating, and that's probably way out of date. And of course, do we have CSM support, or is it removed from upstream? Hans, again, I'm curious if you've spent time with EDK2.
I did. It's been a while, but yes, I did. As far as I know, CSM was removed upstream. And because of that, there were two packages in the FreeBSD ports collection. One was an even older version that still had CSM support.
Hmm.
It needed Python 2.7 or something. So that was really old. That was the stuff that I used when I tried to get a Visa video ROM into bhyve to support a Visa frame buffer for CSM systems. And I got that to work, but that is a couple years ago. So at that time, well, last time I looked at it, actually, I spent time with this EDK2 stuff. So I do know the code somewhat. I think it's terribly ugly, but okay. I mean, it's there and needs to work. So yeah, that's definitely something that I could work on. That's definitely something that I'm capable of doing. And yeah, when it comes to CSM, I think either we'll carry around the old version indefinitely, or we'll see how we can use cBIOS for that. Either cBIOS standalone, or maybe we can put it somehow into the EDK2 stuff that it's added like a CSM. So those are the two options that I have. But as I haven't looked at cBIOS yet, I can't tell you which of the two it will be. But yeah,
Yep.
looking at the firmware code and seeing what has changed and importing a newer version and testing that to some extent at least with bhyve and see what modifications might be necessary. That's definitely something that I could do.
So noted, and then I will work on screaming from the clock tower at finding a small budget for you to spend some time on that when you have other things competing for your attention, because we respect your time and expertise. Let's see. I will drop this entire doc in the chat. You are welcome to comment. There should be few surprises here. Some were from parallel conversations like the Open at2 system call. It looks like Ed has not been able to roll in. Any questions broadly to me on this notion that has formalized in the last 48 hours? Because if it's clear as day, great. If you can spare a few bucks, euros, farthings, francs, whatever your currency is of choice, great. If not, I understand. Oh, I understand. So, Patrick, Hans, one that came up super early, and I know Ed has some questions and concerns. And actually, here's a fantastic topic for the call. Let's bring it on home. The impersonation, or some better term, such as a compatibility layer or set of features. I would love to hear use cases. No, let me rephrase that. Ed would love to hear use cases for when we have a firm need for bhyve to behave like something else, be it to run a little maintenance utility from a vendor that only works on VMware, and its only check is to say, hey, is the string VMware. Gang, I'd love to hear your feedback.
So I think this only will work as long as it's about the CPU ID identification for the
Okay.
hypervisor. If you want to go deeper than that, then you will have to start emulate devices the way other hypervisors do. And in case of an open source hypervisor, that would be possible. In case of a closed source one, that would be really, really difficult. Yeah, and that's the question. What exactly would an operating system or even a user space program on an operating system even care about? What it's running at what level? So if it's really just about checking, okay, is this a VMware system, for instance, like you mentioned, then that is relatively simple to do by faking the bits.
But the VMware specific paravirtualized drivers may be a problem.
Yeah, well, the question is when you do that, when you fake the CPU ID, how hardly do you confuse the guest OS? And will it start doing stuff that just doesn't work? But that's really something that you have to check on a case-by-case basis. So the CPU ID faking is what is the change that we have in Illumos. And that allows you to redefine any part of CPU ID that you want. I mean, you can actually limit CPU ID features that you like. The original motivation, I think, was, or at least that's what the bug says, stuff like reducing the feature set of the CPU in case you want to do a live migration to a system which might lack one of the newer features that you might have. So you could disable them by CPU ID and yeah, and you can of course also say you change the CPU ID leaf that identifies the hypervisor, and then hypervisor will identify it something it isn't. And depending on how this is coded in the guest OS, this may not be a problem, or it may be one, and you just have to try. So ideally, hypervisor feature would be a separate CPU ID leaf that's independent of the CPU of the hypervisor identification string. So if that's the case.
And in fairness, masking out the parts of the CPU information like that is also something that VMware does for that exact same reason.
Oh, do
facilitating. They? Oh yeah. You can set up when you set up a.
Oh, you mean the countless number of like CPUs to choose from and that kind of features, but does it ever say, hey, I'm not VMware?
No, it doesn't say I'm not VMware, but it says that it will set its why am I drawing a blank? The CPU feature flags in the guest OS. It will limit them specifically for compatibility, so you can transfer between particularly multiple generations of hardware. It never works, I've never tried it. They say it never works between AMD and Intel.
It doesn't.
And I believe it.
Well, anyway, that's precisely what the change in Illumos does. You can redefine any CPU ID. I mean, it's probably a bit tedious because I haven't seen any user space tool for that. It seems to be just the bits in the kernel part of bhyve, or maybe in the user space bits that emulate CPU ID. I don't know where exactly that lives. But I didn't see anything that you could use to actually change the configuration. That might be missing if you report this previously. And when that is added, it's still tricky to use because you really have to know all the CPU ID stuff that you're messing with. But once that is there, if you were so inclined to do that, you could probably add a feature that has that of CPU ID stuff that you could enable with a simple configuration.
Yes, Jan?
Let the CPU look like a 486 or something. That might work. Or identify as KVM, for instance. That would be something that you could do that uses the CPU messing down.
Your audio is cutting out, sorry to say.
My audio is cutting out?
A little bit.
Can you hear me again?
Yes, that's a little better. Jan, it sounds like you have your hand up. Looks like you have your hand up, and it sounds like you have some questions or
ideas. There's an an intermediate level where you don't really pretend to be the hypervisor by faking stuff, but you intentionally behaving in a compatible way to take advantage of things. For example, if you have a VirtIO console device with the right name, for example, guests may automatically start a QEMU agent on that virtual serial port using the Power Virtualized console driver. And then you can send them JSON encoded requests to read or write a file or execute a command from the host into the guest. Other things would be to behave in such a way that cloud init images work and so on, that you provide them with a way to get the configuration payload out of band via the right block device mapped read-only into the virtual machine so that you don't have to provision them via Ethernet.
As in Cloud Init, as I recall?
Yep, Cloud Init, or previously, for example, in recent releases has a partial re-implementation of that API.
Colin
So
Init or something?
New Age Init or something written in Lua, and it can be configured just like Cloud in its full installation by making a FAT32 or ISO file system available on a block device, which requires less configuration inside the guest than having yet another Ethernet device show up, running a DHCP service on that, and then having an IPv6 link local or IPv4 link local address with the well-known URL for your configuration payload and so on. And pretending to be just a common QEMU may make it easier to reuse what guests already do. It's not lying per se. If you would look in the ACPI tables, bhyve would still report itself as bhyve, but their startup scripts would just notice, oh, here's a configuration payload exposed to the way QEMU does it.
That's a very good point.
The other behavior would be to make guest operating systems which did not care to learn about bhyve before trigger their workarounds for QEMU for things like power virtualized timers, maybe, or in the case of Hyper-V, there's a hypercall for TLB shootdown instead of sending an interprocessor interrupt to all other cores and so on.
TLB what down?
TLB shootdown
Shoot down? Okay.
or invalidation.
Invalidation is a more polite one. Thank you.
Um,
And
so
does
that you
anyone
can,
recall Domagoy's hypercall review?
yep,
What?
that's the one I think. And if you can get Windows to behave like that and use it, maybe we get less overhead, and especially on high core count machines, inefficient TLB invalidation can really hurt guest performance. Because in inside the virtual machine, I think you have to do the traditional send an interprocessor interrupt to all other cores instead of using something like inf TLB instructions. Yeah, so the efficient ways to do it aren't directly accessible, and you need to have a custom hypercall to do that.
Okay. I will move libvdsk here because that's a perfect segue insofar as maybe you're not pretending you're QEMU, but you support QCOW2 out of the box because per my earlier example, there might be a vendor VM that only works with a QCOW2 image, and if you convert it to raw, you are violating your warranty, and you're this and you're that, and lawyers come and they yell at you and they wipe out your support contract. So little things like that that are all usability features. And that sort of maybe I don't know if there's a Venn diagram you can come up with which each hypervisor is doing and what are the most valuable common features, be it a block device in a predictable location or a serial interface with a consistent name. It's simple stuff like that. So the call to action is to please all help fund some of this research. It need not be a ton of money, but we learn a lot from every moment in it. Yes. Yes. Well, it's beyond the scope of this meeting to discuss the shortcomings of having vendors who do things like require a specific hypervisor for a VM. Anyway, moving on. Any questions about that?
One,
Yes.
how, in, I mean, take this as a completely I'm being naive question, but how how much of this do we actually see where vendors are doing that kind of thing?
It's come up on the calls. Um, uh, all of this is
Hearsay.
weighed by how often things have come up. Hopefully, there aren't any wild goose chases here, but that's not to be ruled out. Go ahead, Jan. You had a comment?
I mean, it might be,
Didn't provide an
sorry.
precise location. You just said it has come up, so I just interjected hearsay.
Check the doc. Which raises the question, if a more formal survey is appropriate on some of these,
That's what I
great.
was about to ask, if it might be useful to have a listing of things that this is used for, if for nothing else, that if we want to do it, we need to know what things we need to implement.
Okay. Well, there has been a very successful organic prioritization on these calls over the last many years since 2008. So
That's
18,
fair.
was it? 18, sorry. It's been a while. Anyway, what topics warrant surveys? And here's the beautiful part. Also, while this isn't super fine-grained at the point, people vote with their pocketbooks. So um, the key point is to just take the machete through the forest and jungle and find out what can be done, can't be done, and go from there. And then elevate these to formal proposals, and a certain foundation has said, hey, we are looking for foundations and projects to fund. Anyway, let's see where that takes us. Any and all help is appreciated, and very small amounts of money go a rather far way. So, Andrew, you brought up the fact that the AMD RX 970 and 970 XT have shown up on the market, what, right about now? And they, by
Yes, they
comparison,
dropped
are
today.
not today. Great, are not necessarily super expensive given the history of GPUs and such. Do you know their power draw off the top of your head?
It is high
Okay.
compared to their competition. Power efficiency is where they engineered to give up
Okay.
something.
Okay. Uh, have there been announcements of a super junior version that's lighter weight based on as much of the same chipset as possible? Or it's
Not
a very
yet.
solid
I
category separation?
expect um, lower end ones to come out.
So the non-XT variant is only $50 cheaper and vastly slower, so it has a lot
I wouldn't
less
say
value.
vastly.
Well, performance per dollar is a lot worse for the non-XT variant, which is a bit unusual that the premium version has a better value one.
That's been happening lately.
Speaking of fundraising, if anyone's feeling spicy and wants to help pay for getting one of these in the hands of, say, the people present who can test it, jump right in. Uh, I did not have a budget planned for one, thank you very much. But hey, any and all help is appreciated. And do you foresee supply issues, or they've been
In the
pretty
short term,
available in your book?
at least I'm hearing from people in Europe that they're going like insert something that goes very quickly, probably faster than hotcakes. Um,
Your local culinary delight of choice?
or whatever. Uh, but I'm also hearing that the plans for uh, over the coming months, continuing to push out new supply is well done. So supply should remain available.
Are they coming from countries with announced tariffs per hour? I know that can vary by the
I
hour,
can't keep
but
up with that
just
at the rate that's changing,
oh,
to be honest.
got it.
And of course, it doesn't affect any of our friends over in Europe.
I'm just waiting for the day that Trump tries to announce 25% tariffs on anything coming from Taiwan. That's going to be a shit show to
we'll
end
find a
all
new
shit
industry.
shows.
That said, now 90, I do not see them available on a popular site despite them being listed as bestsellers. They're not available. Now, is there a company rebranding these that has, say, above and beyond driver support and availability? I see one from
I mean, driver support's sorry.
No, go ahead. No, I'm just giving
Driver
the
support's going to be straight up AMD. So driver support should be the same for all of them.
Their
And their
firmware to
drivers,
worry about? Just saying.
not sure on that.
Okay.
But I know from a hardware perspective, XFS is usually a good vendor. I think I've heard pretty good things from Sapphire as well. So I would probably go with those two. My current
over Asus?
Asus is fine.
Okay, cool. Okay.
I mean, I don't know who I would. I'm just saying. I know the current card in one of my machines is an XFS card or XFX.
I know. Like that's hard to.
That's
It doesn't roll off
it's
the tongue.
The 7900 XT, so
Hmm.
it's last gen, and I can't justify going to a mid-range card of this gen, even though they trade blows in a lot of cases.
Alrighty. Best Buy sold out. Well, may this land on your holiday wish list. Okay, moving on. Any news on the Intel Arc department? I think there were no Intel Arc drivers on FreeBSD, which made it somewhat unattractive for FreeBSD users, even though one might be using a guest operating system that has no relationship to FreeBSD, short of maybe some network stack goodies from a long time ago. Does anyone here have an Intel Arc card? Alrighty then. So I'm very glad one of you clicked on this link. Mark Linneman has been great about dropping it in on these calls and launched a patch QA tool recently, but has not been available to tell us about it. It does some smoke testing of patches attached to problem reports in FreeBSD land, also known as bugs.freebsd.org. Here's a link. Check it out. Question for Ed, who did not make it. Jan, you've helped convince the group that proper process supervision is somewhat important. I cannot say if it's a valid project to add that to Daemon or if we should be listening to you and following, say, the path of S6RC. I do know that the Wi-Fi box utility is using Daemon for better or for worse. Yes, was that Han?
Yeah, child process supervision is already in Daemon.
Okay.
No, it's not really. It's just unconditional restarting.
Yeah, sure. Well, I never use anything else with supervisor D, so.
Yes, but there's more to it, like making sure you have the proper environment to inherit, dispatching on the exit code, bottling ridiculously fast restarts, state tracking and reporting so that you can not just start it, but then passing along signals. Yeah, these kinds of things.
Okay.
What would be nice would be if you could get a process descriptor for your own process and then send that out, because then you could do process supervision from a child, so that but that's just.
Did you say process description to manage with a child process?
Nah, it would be. The problem is you can only get the only way to obtain a process descriptor, which is a really elegant way of dealing with process supervision. But the only process way to get this kind of descriptor is to use PD fork for the process creation. So you cannot. There's no system call to attach a new process descriptor to an existing process, or to get a new process descriptor for an already existing process. I don't know if it would be hard to add. It shouldn't be. There are reasons why you don't want a process to have its own process descriptor, because unless the kernel learns about this special case, it might deadlock the process and turn it into a zombie on shutdown, because it would kind of be stuck being to keep you couldn't destroy the state, because there's a little way to get a deadlock there, but if you're implementing it wrong at all.
Does
I've never
that
tried to intentionally create this condition you can via file descriptor parsing. So I could write a test case if this problem is real or imaginary. But
go ahead.
so the important parts would be a way to send, basically, daemon would have to bind a socket, and then you would have to be able to send it a handful of simple commands to read the supervised process D and signals in a race-free way, so that the reaper for the process is the only one allowed to use the process ID without risking a race. So you would have to have a way to send signals to the supervised process from its reaper, because no other process can trust that the PID remains valid between time of check and time of use. These kinds of things, it's not a lot of code, and of course you could add it to daemon. At that point, it would kind of turn into a supervisor D, and it would be useful. Another way which would also be nice, is a way for it to turn into a kind of T for standard out and error, so that you could not just forward the standard out and error to syslog D line by line, but attach to it, maybe even have it run with its own controlling TTY and get the master TTY for that passed out, so that could write something like a tmux for that and attach to that process. Would all be nice for different use cases.
Does S6RC
Probably
get this
like
kind of right or
2009
very
CC.
right?
What?
Does S6RC get this kind of right or very right?
What it does, it gets right.
Okay.
It doesn't do all the things you can do on FreeBSD, because it uses only POSIX APIs by design. So it sometimes has to struggle a bit, and the code is harder to write, but it has been written. If you know that you're only writing for FreeBSD, like FreeBSD's daemon command in the base system can do, you can simplify some things by using FreeBSD specific APIs, just like Linux only process supervisors have an easier time of things.
What's an example?
For example, using process descriptors instead of PIDs to send signals and supervise the process exit status and so on.
Thank you.
Or using procctl to get a signal when a child dies, or the other way around, so that you get a signal if your parent dies. Can all be done. But
that also applies to a child process. You corrected yourself.
Yeah, you can do it in both ways with
Okay,
procctl, whereas normally only it's an old SGI RX feature which a few years ago was implemented on both FreeBSD and Linux. They are slightly different APIs, if I remember correctly, but it does the same thing.
Cool.
And these kind of things, yeah, they're useful. And I'm sure you could use it to simplify a bunch of RC scripts in the ports tree, because basically any Go server has to be supervised externally because of Linux brain damage to this day and forever more until Linux changes. Go applications cannot demonize and drop privileges, because by the time you reach the main function of a Go process, it's already multi-threaded, and set EUID cannot be used reliably in a multi-threaded process on Linux, because Linux to this day is confused about the distinction between processes and threads. And so every thread has to be signaled in a cooperative way to do the set EUID per process, and it's really messy and racy. And glibc pretends that it can do it, but it's not perfectly race free to do that. And Go just has no, this is not reasonable, we will not support it, and because of that, you cannot properly drop privileges and demonize a Go process. You
What
have to
do they
have either
typically
some
wrap
kind
it
of
in? Can you name a
on
wrapper?
FreeBSD,
No, in Go
with
processes, so on any
Go
platform.
process normally expect the operator to pick some kind of supervisor, and they just run in the foreground. And on FreeBSD, all of the recent-ish ports should use daemon, or if they need something more, something else from ports. But yeah.
Okay. Any other thoughts or questions from others on that topic? I know it's in the weeds, but it's important, and it applies to, like, when you run the bhyve process, which is a little important to the people present.
Here's a nice rant on that Linux versus Go issue from 2015.
Okay, I see it in chat. I'll put it in the doc.
Put it in chat.
Yep, I got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
More info. I'll put it there. Thank you. Luckily, not our problem for the most part. Hans and Andrew, do you recall any unique process supervision for Go apps on Lumos in a zone?
For what?
Process supervision of a Go application. A Go application, as Jan is pointing out, relies on the host OS to wrap it in something to handle supervision.
No, wait.
Oh, did I say that wrong? Go ahead.
Yes, Go applications don't demonize themselves because you can't do it in Go on Linux. So they just stay in the foreground, and it's on the, in FreeBSD's case, port maintainer to come up with a startup script which still works. So
SMF and SMF handles that very well if a daemon isn't actually a daemon.
Yeah.
Repeat that?
The SMF is absolutely thrilled if you don't want to behave like a daemon.
Ah,
I like S6 and all the other stuff. So process supervisors really love it, and that's the one. Basically, yeah, it's the one thing we can thank systemd for, is that they finally made this deployment common enough to overcome opposition by people who have an unreasonable fondness for Unix traditions without understanding them in the common case.
SMF is a process supervisor, so it's a non-issue for us.
That's the answer. Perfect. Thank you.
In FreeBSD, you could just put it in etc rise and have init supervisor, but that's messy and not well thought out.
That was me, not Hans, I think. So.
Yeah, between latency and noise and you name it, just chime on in, correct me when I'm wrong. Jan,
I'd hate to get blamed for me saying something.
Blame me. Good.
Yeah, that's not exactly what I said. That was someone else.
Oh, the thrilled, I thought was you, Andrew. Eh? Oh, Hans. Oh, you're
Thrilled
right.
is
All right,
Andrew.
let me fix that. Yeah. Well, you anonymous and okay. Patrick, what's this about VTnet hardware offloading? You learned something
We
new?
Yeah, we've been discussing this issue in this group because it is related to virtualization in general, and we have this sometimes the performance of netted or any routing performance of FreeBSD as a guest in a KVM hypervisor just drops and in 2 orders of magnitude worse than could be achieved. We've been discussing this with Antronic, and I finally found the links to the KVM issue at hand here.
Link,
So
link.
all the links are in the document already. So
Oh, down below. Oh, wait.
we have a forum discussion on the OPNsense
Oh,
forum that
here we
started.
go. Sweet. Nicely done.
And we have in our bug tracker a 13-year-old issue where all the information is already in that issue.
Goodness.
And some participant in the discussion really opened my eyes because he said, "All right, no, the KVM hypervisor sometimes intentionally just refuses to checksum the data if it's passing data between VMs on the same hypervisor host." Because it's just a mem copy. You don't need to check
Right.
on the network packet because there is no network there. So we get a
There's a
partial.
flag to tell you.
Pardon?
Repeat.
There's a
that.
status flag to tell you that this has happened.
Yes,
If
there's a
it's true.
status flag passed from the hypervisor to the guest to indicate that this is the case, and FreeBSD doesn't handle it. If you switch back to our meeting notes, you need to scroll all the way down to the more recent discussion. This is a quote from the FreeBSD driver source, a comment that exactly states the problem
Oof. Thank you, Tom.
in the meeting discussion.
Okay.
In
Cool.
meeting notes.
Yep. Getting there. Just
This comes from FreeBSD driver source. So person responsible for the VTnet driver in FreeBSD actually documented that we lack this feature and that we need it. There's a proposed patch to which I linked. This is sitting completely unattended since 2016. And I also linked to the VirtIO spec that states how things should behave. So I don't know if this is an easy win, if the patch works, or if it doesn't, or if it needs adjustment, because after 9 years of lying around, it needs adjustment to more modern kernels or anything, but definitely there's something that should be done.
I try to add a little highlight to things that might need some attention. Okay.
There's another issue that the bhyve callback interface for implementing VirtIO net backends does not support batching or multi-queue operation. So the bhyve on its own just shows up as a fairly crippled VirtIO device. It doesn't do LRO TSO, it doesn't do multi-queue operation, doesn't do proper batching. So yeah, it's lots and lots of hypervisor exits and using only one thread in the bhyve process on the host to handle all of that, which limits your packet rate and thereby your throughput.
Just one more thing to add why this is important for us for the FreeBSD project, because people are looking into deploying OPNsense or pfSense in virtual environments as virtual firewalls inside the hypervisor to isolate and route between VMs. And they get
I didn't finish.
They get abysmal performance compared to Linux. So that's the point that should be addressed.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, the workaround right now for this problem with the VirtIO net guest driver is to, annoyingly enough, disable hardware checksum offloading on the VirtIO net, but this is about the guest driver when FreeBSD is the guest inside a virtual machine. What I mentioned is about when bhyve is the hypervisor for running any operating system, including FreeBSD or Linux. That the virtual.net device emulated or power virtualized by bhyve is just not using all of the spec, and so leaving a lot of performance on the table.
Jan, you say GSO is hard-coded?
Well, they have a status like for GSO, but that's a software kind of offloading feature, which works by trying to delay the segmentation as long as possible, so that you do it at the very end of the packet processing, so that you hopefully have to process fewer packets through the upper layers of your virtual network stack, and then you'll get to do the segmentation at the end once, which helps. But its semantics are basically defined by the Linux implementation of the feature, but the virtual.net specification that Rick already linked to has this as a feature flag. So there are some Linux isms in the spec.
Interesting.
For virtualized driver.
Interesting.
Which would mean that FreeBSD, if it wants to provide this if running as a host for virtual machines, would have to match the semantics. That flag there.
So that's a Linux-ism, and it's in the spec. Okay.
Yep, it's basically, this host behaves like the current Linux kernel does when you turn this feature on.
I know on my OPNsense instance, I have disabled checksums. I don't know that I've tried it without them disabled. For whatever that's worth.
There you go. Your mileage may vary. Let's hear how that results. And it's almost as if you could set up a second VM just as a quick test. I don't know. And for those who missed it, Andrew's been running OPNsense under bhyve under a zone under Illumos, I believe OmniOS, correct?
Yeah, it's a Lumos machine running a bhyve instance of OPNsense.
Wait, this is the way.
My home network is behind it, including doing some light server workloads.
Oh, let's see. Doing another shopping search here for that.
Yay, fiber to the home.
Yeah. Oh, don't even want to talk about it. Yeah, ask me over a beverage. The fiber project on my road has been terrible, with like landslides crushing conduits and a bridge being built where they conveniently forgot to include a conduit for the telco. It's like, great.
What
Maybe
are
my
those idiots
great-grandchildren will
doing
have fiber.
professionally?
You think sabotaging it professionally or what? What?
No, busy. Just how? Just baffling. But
Geography
you're not
is
alone
part
with
of the
this
problem.
problem.
Yeah. Out in the countryside, they
for-
have fiber everywhere. It's great, but here in the city, no. I'll shut up. So, other topics, questions, ideas, funny jokes. Sounds like episode 600 has some good network goodies. And if you haven't seen it, Tom Jones has what, a weekly or monthly state of the network stack report. That's quite cool. It's linked in a recent call. Clearly a lot of work goes into that. Great work, Tom. Yay. Appreciated. So looking at the time, we are not quite at a moose jaw, but we're getting there.
Well, I have to head out anyway. I will
Cool.
catch y'all later.
Take care, Andrew. And a little birdie told me that Rob Norris, who's been wonderful on the calls, actually has a blog-like newsfeed coming, and I saw some graphics preview of it. So watch this space. Yeah, he's rocking and rolling. Are we at 1915 UTC and have a nice day, or do you have other topics, questions, ideas?
No extra
Edward?
topics for me.
Okay, thank you, Eva.
Edward, if you're still listening.
Yep.
As documented in the minutes from yesterday's call, I found a way to build against libzfs from ports, which may be of interest to you because it would allow the Samba 4.19 and 4.20 and so on ports to take advantage of the AX systems module and build that again without making it part of the base system build, basically, so that you could have a proper little ports patch file, build the Samba port, and have a Samba module to expose ZFS snapshots as volume shadow copies.
Oh, okay.
Do check out
So
the
that-
recording. It was a great discussion.
Not quite my ballpark. Sorry.
Okay.
Not running Windows and not doing Zamba development or integration or anything. It's just
Okay. Because I thought you brought
but
that
it
up.
definitely might be interested to some. I mean, I hear there are quite a few sites running that operating system from Redmond.
This is true. On that note, who would like the honors? Ah, you're killing me. Richard,
Like and
unmute yourself.
subscribe.
Okay, cool. Yeah, you got it. Jan, thank you so much. That's about to beat up on Richard. Have a great one. Talk to you next week. I will post this as quickly as possible. The conversations have been fantastic. Thank you, everyone, for being a part of that.
See you, folks. Bye bye. Take care.